registrants for today's circle. So good afternoon. It is 12 o'clock here in the territory where I'm sitting, 12 o'clock noon, and I wish you all want to say welcome to the World Virtual Indigenous Circle on Open Science and the Decolonization of Knowledge. Today's webinar is organized by the Canadian Commission for United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, also known as UNESCO, and it's co-hosted by the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium. The discussions and expertise shared today will help UNESCO in their development of a recommendation on open science and the decolonization of knowledge. My name is Laurie Robinson, and I have the honor of moderating this circle. I am an Anishinaabe Kwe, and my homeland is in the territory of the Wolf Lake peoples. I am the executive director of the very first quality assurance organization for Indigenous institutes. It is called the Indigenous Advanced Education and Skills Council in Ontario, Canada. For some of us, when Indigenous peoples gather to share knowledge and understandings, we do so in a circle, and particular protocols and approaches are taken to help facilitate sharing information. For example, for some, this may mean the passing of an eagle feather or another sacred item to the speaker. Today, our circle is a virtual one and is online, and as best I can, I will facilitate our discussion honoring those protocols. We will have an opening from the western part of the lands where I sit today, an opening song from the east, remarks from a few organizations, presentations by speakers from many parts of the world, an open dialogue with all of the participants who are joining us here today, summations by two scholars, and a closing song. As we prepare to get the circle underway, I have a few housekeeping items to share with you all, and this will help to ensure the best experience for all participants and attendees. Please keep your microphone on mute on your device until you're invited to speak. I'm asking everyone to turn their cameras and microphones off unless they are speaking. If you choose to keep your video on, that is quite all right as well. When you are speaking, please sit or stand close to the microphone and ensure as best you can that there are no obstructions to your microphone. Exit all unnecessary applications on your device and finally, I want to let you know that the event today is being recorded. The recorded session will be posted to the UNESCO YouTube channel in the coming days. In addition to that, a transcript of the discussions, presentations, and all of the dialogue will be prepared. For all of those who are sharing information on social media today for this event, I invite you to use the following hashtags: hashtag decolonized knowledge and hashtag open science. The handles for UNESCO is @CCUNESCO for Twitter and Facebook. Miigwech everyone for your cooperation. We will begin today's circle with an opening from Mr. John Elliott of Saanich First Nation. John is a respected elder of his First Nation and has taught at Kawaiʻaeʻa Tribal School in Saanich for over 30 years. Mr. Elliott?
CM Nestelacha. CM Nestelacha Unosta Uchitel CM Kunzi Kuduk STOLÞEÐEÐ� Tanga Naquiliate Noxium Eslati Sanichang. See the Ines Qualican CM at the Kunsquata Naquilia CM Quilno CM. It just seemed to the Nesquatnessne. She is an athlete, Saanich, Quilno, who won the Elanga Sati at the Matang Helagan, who Makutning at the Satia, who cheated the Quilly Conseg, she now she quintal 8 qualified this quest this she, but Naquilly quite a hitzel now at this she at the Kaka at the which when Nicholas well CM. Just a few words saying in the homeland language of the Saanich people. First of all, I wanted to thank Lorna, my dear friend, respected friend, for asking me to join you all today. I feel very humbled by this opportunity to be able to be here with you today and say the opening prayer. I was saying that my Sinchatan name is Chisigton. It's an old name that goes back quite a ways into the 1700s here in this area. And I was given that name when I was given an honorary education degree from University of Victoria. They changed my name from STOLÞEÐEÐ� to Chisington, means it's growing up the people. My name means it's growing up the people. And I've worked in language for so long, and the revival survival of our homeland language. And like 40 years went by so fast. But I was saying that all of our languages are a God-given right, and that the wellness of our language is very connected to the wellness of the earth. And so I wanted to keep that in mind as I do this opening prayer and song. And I'll do the prayer in the language and I'll do the song. And the song that I will use today is a song that was gifted to us as we were in a little prayer circle many years ago, 40-something years ago. And two little ancestor ladies came in our circle and gave us this song. And they said, when you want your language to survive and you want to pray for the languages, use this song. So I'll use that one today. With that, I'll begin my prayer. It's being a dog to questions at the end of the destination to Quilngo. A mock the Elliott, but the Hackatan square tongue and shay tongue oxium. Just see him at Hackasism to attend when shake what letting. A matter 8 spells when I saw it is when I Quilngo who's a hill long at the end when shakes equal to tongue along the Hackasism. It really want to mock Quilngo see him at the J now take one tag H quala contain now take one tag him. He needs sleep that and Hackatans when he along at Hackasism at Wednesday. When it's late for the spirit failing is level school and you mock. We mock well see him take that and Hackatan say he's at the long at the oh ho yo oh ho yo oh yo oh ho oh ho yo oh ho yo oh yo oh ho oh ho yo oh ho yo oh yo oh ho oh ho yo oh ho yo That's my prayer and my song. And that song we've been singing for the last 40 years since the ancestors passed it along to us. And I use it every day. And I pray that our languages will survive, that our people and our children will have a dignified life and find a life of peace and harmony once again in this world. Thank you so much for gathering together and speaking about these important issues. Thank you very much. That's all I'll have to say.
Miigwech, John. I'd now invite Ms. Gudgie Cook. Gudgie Cook is an Akwesasne Mohawk. She is respected as an elder and traditional Aboriginal midwife. She is a lifelong advocate of women's health and well-being. She is the director of the Spirit Aligned Leadership Program, a program that exists to elevate the lives, dreams, and voices of North American Indigenous women elders.
Yakoa Sego Sewa Gwego. This song I'm going to share is a call to the four beings at the four directions of the universe to ask for their support, their help in helping our people, our families, like that. Kaeli niungweta ke wantuka osko waze zayatanu nane yakwa wachile wantuka oskoyana waze yo hana yo ya he yo hana yo ya he yo hayo hana yo ya he yo hana yo ya he kaeli niungweda ke wanduka oskoyana waze zayatanu nane yakwa wachile hawanduka oskoyana waze yo hana yo ya he yo hana yo ya he yo hayo hana yo ya he yo hana yo ya he kaeli niungweta ke wanduka oskoyana waze sayatanu nane yakwa wachile hawanduka oskoyana waze yo hana yo ya he yo hana yo ya he yo hayo hana yo ya he yo hana yo ya he kaeli niungweda ke wanduka oskoyana waze sayatanu nane yakwa wachile hawanduka oskoyana waze yo hana yo ya he yo hana yo ya he yo hayo hana yo ya he yo hana yo ya he yo Taneto.
Thank you both so much for that beautiful opening. What a wonderful way to start our circle today. It is my honor and my pleasure to introduce you now to Dr. Lorna Williams. Dr. Williams is an Associate Professor Emerita of Indigenous Education at the University of Victoria. She is also the chair of First Peoples Cultural Foundation in British Columbia. Dr. Williams will set the stage for our virtual circle today by speaking on why we are all gathered here today and what we hope to accomplish. Dr. Williams?
There. Tsartlip. Total amas kekalep l'jawana kamukhmin twatla. Kukstamchok Laurie. Kukstamchok John, Jacinton, and Kaji for starting us off in a good way. Thank you to each of you for coming to join us and for coming to work together on this important topic. I want to thank the lands and the people on whose lands I am on. the Lakwanan speaking people, the Sanchothan speaking people. I'm Lil'wat. That's where my ancestors are, my family, my community. And it's a real honor for me to be a part of this gathering. Nathan, I had asked you to add for me the frogs that were on our, can you do that now? Thank you. I want to acknowledge the artist who created this and to thank Dorothea for letting us use it. This is an important image. It's an image of the frogs that at this time of year announce gatherings, ceremonial gatherings. They announce these gatherings that are used for transformation, because it's a time for us to revisit who we are, where we are, who our ancestors are, where our teachings come from, to help us to continue in a good way. So in a sense, that is why what we're doing today. We're gathered today to gather in a circle. And in the middle of our circle is, we are here to shape what is in the middle. The bundle of knowledge that will guide the way in which Indigenous peoples' knowledge from all over the world can add to the knowledge that continues and is created. Our knowledge systems, our languages, our identities have been under assault for generations and generations. And it was in a prophecy that the time would come when we would join together to ensure that our knowledge will continue. As Indigenous people, we have been working with our ancestors to be able, and with the lands, with all our relatives, to continue, and that our knowledge systems continue to be used and known, and to be gifted to our descendants. So we're here to add our knowledge to the world. And each of us who speaks today will shape what that looks like. We will share so that that knowledge is used in a respectful way, and so that it doesn't become distorted, that it's honest and full of integrity. I want, so that it's protected, but it is a part of the world. We're coming out from the shadows, and I want to thank each of you for contributing to that knowledge system. Each of you will add and shape that knowledge, and so that it can be remembered, so that it can be a guide for all of us continuing forward in education and in research, in studies, in the reshaping of institutions to protect and to uphold our mother, the earth, our father, the sun, and all of our relatives. So thank you very much, each of you, for being a part of this and adding your voice, and to breaking the silence of Indigenous knowledge. It's time to decolonize and to help all of our brothers and sisters around the world to be able to do this. So kukshtumukalep, each of you. I would now like to open the way, because we don't have much time. And I want to first acknowledge Sebastien, because it's really important to know that when work needs to be done, that people come forward, people step up to do the work that needs to be done. And I just want to acknowledge Sebastien, the head of the Canada UNESCO, for stepping up and offering his support to make sure that this circle will happen. I want to thank his team and for all the help that they've provided us to be able to bring everybody together. So Sebastien, I'd like you to say the first words to open the session. Maybe he went away.
Sorry, the joy of technologies. I was thanking Dr. Williams for good words and thanking Elder Elliott and Elder Cook. Kwe aloha, akwanesh kwanenetli. Welcome everyone. I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people on Turtle Island, which is known today as Canada. Advancing reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples is extremely important to us at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. And this is why I'm very happy to be participating in and supporting this important conversation. I've been working hard with my team, our members and networks to position our commission as a strong ally of Indigenous peoples. And it is a real honor to be invited to say a few words today. As you know, UNESCO, as a specialized agency of the UN system, plays an important role in setting standards and norms on a variety of priorities, especially those relating to the protection and promotion of all forms of rights, culture, and heritage. UNESCO is currently working towards producing a new recommendation on open science. And this new international standard setting instruments will soon be adopted, which means that UNESCO will invite its member states to take whatever legislative or other steps that may be required to apply those principles and norms at the national level. This is why it is so vitally important that this new recommendation contributes to efforts underway to decolonize knowledge, as Dr. Williams was saying. It needs to accurately reflect diverse knowledge systems, especially the views and experiences of Indigenous peoples around the world. I strongly believe that our gathering today and the work we have proactively advanced with partners from all around the globe will enable us to not only influence, but I think shape how Indigenous and other forms of traditional knowledges will be reflected in this new recommendation. In fact, I find that we have a moral obligation to ensure that they be made visible and central to how we understand the world in which we live. The practice of science can no longer ignore the knowledge and wisdom that comes from these knowledge systems that have been around for times immemorial and can continue to benefit future generations. We were very happy as a commission to work with two exceptional allies and leaders, Dr. Williams and Dr. Hall, on a paper to this effect. It calls for science to be a dialogue between knowledges rather than a knowledge that exists only insofar as it silences or eliminates other knowledges. And this conversation, this circle today, is one of a series of 11 webinars that discuss this important paper and that seeks to influence this UNESCO recommendation. The webinars are helping create the right ethical space to advance this much needed dialogue. Moving forward, we need to ensure that science is open to local and place-based knowledge, as well as to previously excluded knowledge systems, including Indigenous ones. We need to ensure that science is a practice that is conducted with and for communities. In closing, I want to extend a special thanks to Dr. Williams for the outstanding work she has done to mobilize partners to organize the circle today. We are very fortunate, Dr. Williams, to count you as a friend of our commission. Thank you for your outstanding support. Special thanks as well to our co-host, the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Council, and the UNESCO Chair in Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education at the University of Victoria, and to the members of my team who have made this conversation possible. I'm very much looking forward to these discussions and to see how we can work together as allies to shape a much more open and equitable future for science. Merci, thank you, Chimigwech.
Oh, miigwech, Mr. Gouptil, miigwech, Dr. Williams, for the opening remarks. We will now continue hearing from other organizations that have been invited here today to share with us what they are doing. We will start with the co-host of today's circle, Dr. Keiki Kawaiʻaeʻa from the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium, is a native Hawaiian from Kokaha, Hawaii. She serves as the accreditation co-chair for the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium, and she is also the director of Kahaka Ula'o Ke'elikolani College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. WINHEC seeks to provide an international forum and support for Indigenous peoples to pursue common goals through Indigenous education. Joining Dr. Kawaiʻaeʻa today is a student. Her name is Ke'alani Makaivi, and she will be providing an opening and a chant. She is part of one of WINHEC's organizations, the World Indigenous Nations University, Hawaii Pacifica region.
Hi, aloha mai, can you hear me? Aloha?
Yes, we can hear you.
Mahalo nui.
Ano ai ko kākou mea hoʻoki pala e ai. A me nā mea hano ke hoʻohiwa ia nei ma kola e ai. E hui pui ka waiwai. O ko kākou mau kupuna ala e ai. Iahi pu'u ia kākou I ka lokahi. Kanalu imi a kākou mai ka hiki mahila e ai. Me ke aloha no kākou a pau.
Hi, aloha ho mai kako. I'm guessing you could see, can you see me? Okay, great. New technology. Mahalo nui, Laurie. Ia'u ko mai ka puka ana kala I hae ai ka iho ana kala ma ke kuia ka halawai lehua. A pela puna kukulu e hao o ka honua I akoakua mai na hoa oiwi. A me na hoa makamaka a puni ka honua. Aloha nui mai oko. We pay respect to the Indigenous elders and traditional owners present and past of the Lil'wat territory, and we bring greetings from member institutions across the globe, Indigenous elders and knowledge holders who have been the inspirational foundations of WINHEC as an international Indigenous higher education consortium. On behalf of the Executive Committee and members, we extend appreciation and respect to the Secretary General, Canadian Commission, and members of UNESCO Canada, members of the Open Sciences Organizing Committee, especially to you, Dr. Williams, for your leadership, and to the Indigenous Committee and colleagues for the opportunity to participate in this historic global webinar. Established at the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education in 2002, WINHEC has a membership that represents many Indigenous nations and educational institutions in 8 countries, including Alaska, Aotearoa, Australia, Canada, Hawaii, Norway, Taiwan, and the US. In our collective concerns for the rights of Indigenous people to access all levels of education and to address the barriers that impede respectful engagement of Indigenous peoples in teaching, research, and other endeavors in education, the founding members determined that the goals and objectives of WINHEC must align with the goals and objectives of international instruments. These include the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of People, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the International Declaration on Human Rights, and other international documents of note designated to protect and promote the sovereign rights of Indigenous peoples. We are pleased to share that WINHEC members have a documented record of addressing the educational anomalies experienced by Indigenous peoples in higher education with their respective nation states. These accomplishments have enhanced the work of the WINHEC Executive Committee through the establishment of a number of international working parties. Through these global activities, WINHEC has promoted the right of all Indigenous people to enjoy full access and participation across all levels of education. Action has been taken to develop a set of principles and policies to encourage the protection and revitalization of Indigenous languages and language systems. Further to this, WINHEC has developed the Indigenous International Research Standards, the World Indigenous Education and Research Alliance, an International Board of Accreditation, the Global Indigenous Elders and Youth Alliance, and the World Indigenous Nations University, of which Kealani, a student of the Hawaii Pacifica region, shared an opening chant this morning. All of these initiatives are seen as an integral part of the protection and longevity of Indigenous cultures. WINHEC shares a commitment to protecting and promoting the unique scholarship that underpins the rich engagement of Indigenous peoples in teaching, research, and other education-based endeavors. We applaud and support in principle the open science proposal as it pertains to validating, legitimizing, and recognizing Indigenous ways of knowing as science, as a gift that has been passed down through the generations since time immemorial. We humbly encourage the forum to establish an international working party to develop a set of international cultural standards that promote the principles of respectful engagement of Indigenous peoples in education and recognizes the scholarship of Indigenous knowledge and knowledge system, research methodologies, and theoretical frameworks. To this end, WINHEC has prepared a position paper with 6 recommendations that it will support in support of the work forward. Ano laila, make a mahalo nui a ha'aha'a ho'i, our humble gratitude to all of the efforts of today's webinar. Aloha.
Thank you so much for your remarks. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you Dr. Carrie Bourassa from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. Dr. Bourassa is the Scientific Director of CIHR, the Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health. She is also a professor of community health and epidemiology at the University of Saskatchewan. She is she's also part of the Canadian Foundation for Innovation funded Morningstar Lodge. Her remarks will be shared through a video message now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Bourassa. I'm the Scientific Director of the Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health at the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. I want to thank you for inviting me to the World Virtual Indigenous Circle on Open Science and the Decolonization of Knowledge, hosted by UNESCO. I want to talk about Indigenous knowledge, and I'm very honored to be here to speak to you very briefly. Indigenous knowledge is science, and we look to our elders, and I think about ancestral knowledge. You know, this is something that I think is really indisputable. Our elders, our knowledge keepers, they are our PhDs. When I first became the scientific director, the first thing that we did was engage with First Nation, Métis, Inuit, and urban peoples to help us to define what our priorities were going to be for the next 4 years, to help us to understand what the priorities were for Indigenous peoples. It is not up to me as a scientific director or for the Institute to define what those priorities are. If we really want to walk the talk and be in alignment with the TRC and with RCAP and with UNDRIP, then we have to ensure that it is the communities that are driving the Indigenous health research agenda in Canada. And so, you know, our vision was crafted by the elders. We created an elders advisory circle, and we'll share that a little bit later. We also, of course, went across Canada and developed a strategy to engage communities and leadership and Indigenous health organizations who are working in this space to ensure that we had a very comprehensive engagement strategy. So, you know, the vision is really to improve the health and well-being of First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples by supportive, innovative research programs based on scientific excellence and Indigenous community collaborations that respect communities and the right to self-determination. If you want to flip the slide. So in terms of our strategic plan overview, we are committed to community-based research that is led by Indigenous communities in a culturally safe way and that builds capacity at their direction. So with the guidance from our Institute Advisory Board, Indigenous communities, elders, knowledge holders, and keepers, we developed a strategic plan that we see as an evergreen plan. So it's not something that will end. We had community engagement sessions, again, that were very vital in establishing this plan, this vision. And we wanted to make sure that it was the community's voice that will address their community health and well-being needs. And this plan incorporates Indigenous voices while aligning with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as I said before, as well as the TRC, and I also believe, of course, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, if you want to flip the slide. So we did not hear a laundry list of issues. You know, we took a very strengths-based approach, and what we did hear were 4 very key themes. And what we heard, which was no surprise, was self-determination. You know, it is about, you know, having sustainable funding, about Indigenous communities being able to hold their own funds. And we've been working on this diligently for the past 4 years to enhance capacity development and infrastructure, and acknowledging, honoring, and respecting Indigenous health research and histories in an equitable way that promotes wellness, strength, and resilience. And this includes, of course, ensuring that Indigenous knowledge is prioritized. We also, of course, announced the return of the CIHR Network Environment for Indigenous Health Research, the NEAR model, and that was loud and clear from the communities, including elders and knowledge keepers. If you want to flip the slide. Priorities from 2019 to 2024. And again, this is in alignment with the CIHR Health Research Roadmap, but of course we have a new strategic plan that will be announced very soon. This is to promote excellence, creativity, and knowledge translation, to mobilize health research for transformation and impact, and achieve organizational excellence. We prioritized incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing, as well as Western and other non-Indigenous epistemological approaches. But again, it really is about prioritizing Indigenous knowledge. And, you know, if you ever have heard me speak, I always say Indigenous knowledge is science. We are the original scientists. And this is our ancestral knowledge that is inherently within us. And this must be acknowledged. So it is vitally important that our elders, our knowledge keepers, you know, are acknowledged and honored. So IAPH, you know, we work towards contributing to closing the existing gap in the health status between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians, and that must include acknowledging and honoring and prioritizing Indigenous knowledges. If you want to flip the slide. So I just want to again, you know, reinforce and acknowledge, you know, the incredible contribution and guidance of Indigenous elders and knowledge holders, and the grassroots Indigenous communities that must drive the Indigenous health research agenda in Canada. And you can see we have our IAB and our Elders Council that guide us, and how important that spirituality is in research as well. So I want to again just thank you very much for this limited time, and I wish you all the best in your workshop. Chimigwich.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Bourassa. We now have two speakers from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council in Canada, Dominique Berube and David Newhouse. Dominique Berube is Vice President Research at SSHRC and has been in that role since 2015. She is responsible for developing the long-term vision and future direction for SSHRC's research funding programs, and she oversees the strategic direction of tri-agency programs. She is also responsible for the agencies for the implementation of the Indigenous Strategic Plan called Setting New Directions to Support Indigenous Research and Research Training in Canada. Ms. Berube, please.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. So, of course, as you just mentioned, I will share my time with David Newhouse, who is the co-chair of our SSHRC Advisory Circle, but I'm sure you'll be able to introduce him more completely after that. So I'll keep my notes very short because mostly I wanted to thank Lorna Williams for allowing and inviting me to participate. My organization is a funding agency in social sciences and humanities, sort of a sister agency to CIHR, that where Carrie, Bourassa, who just spoke, work. And SSHRC has really benefited for the last 10 years of the advice and guidance from our Indigenous Advisory Circle. It really allowed SSHRC to develop its new Indigenous Research Guideline that we published in 2015, and which recognized at that point the importance of the Indigenous Knowledge system. But since then, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, after following, of course, the Royal also Commission, had a 94 calls to action, and one of them called upon SSHRC to put in place a multi-year program to better understand reconciliation. that time, and we started to work on that in 2015 and 16, just after we had just published our new guidelines. Re-engagement with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit researchers, elders, communities in Canada demonstrated the importance to renew again our relationship, and also to try to not see it in silos, between the different funding agencies such as CIHR, SSHRC, and NSERC, who's going to be speaking a bit later in this circle. So since 2000. We've been with the funding agencies, we renewed that engagement, and through a 2-year process of engagement and co-construction, developed that new Indigenous strategic plan that we released in January 2020. During that pandemic year, we've started to develop our implementation plan. This strategy presents 4 objectives that promotes the leadership of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit in research. I'm happy to provide the link to the strategy if the panel is interested. It will also create the Indigenous Leadership Circle in Research to be launched in the upcoming days, and that will oversee the implementation of the strategy. We recently, the SSHRC Advisory Circle reviewed the strategy and made some important comments, including some very thoughtful comments from Lorna about the recognition of the Indigenous knowledge systems, their value, and the importance of their dissemination. So thank you again for including us in this circle so that we can listen and learn and continue on our path. And I will stop immediately here to leave David Newhouse to continue and share his perspective on that path.
Thank you so much. A few words, I really would like to introduce David Newhouse to you all. He is Onondaga from the Six Nations of the Grand River near Brantford, Ontario. He is Professor of Indigenous Studies and the Director of the Cheney Wenjack School for Indigenous Studies at Trent University, and a professor in the School of Business and Administration. His research interests focus on the development of modern Aboriginal society. He is co-chair of the SSHRC Indigenous Advisory Council and the science officer for the CIHR Indigenous Peoples Health Research Competitions.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. I want to first of all thank Dominique, and we decided this year at the time to demonstrate the spirit of collaboration that has existed with SSHRC for the last quarter century or so. I also want to thank John and Katsi for their opening, and I also want to thank UNESCO and Lorna and Sebastien and the organizers for this important symposium. And like Dominique, I'm honored to be part of the webinar. I am constantly amazed at what we're able to do during the pandemic, and I think what we're seeing is a bit of science at work as well. I think this pandemic is something that none of us have ever experienced. Humankind has never experienced a pandemic like this as well. So, as has been said, right, I'm originally from Six Nations of the Grand River. I'm the director of the Cheney Wenjack School. I've also been co-chair of the SSHRC Indigenous Advisory Circle for the last 5 years or so, and also the science officer for CIHR Aboriginal Peoples Health Competition for the last 15 years or so. And I guess over the last, about 20 years, I've had a front row seat in watching Indigenous knowledge become part of the social science and natural science research enterprise in Canada. And I've seen it come from the margins, being unknown, and then become part of the work that we do as social scientists, as Indigenous researchers, and as natural science researchers. I call colonization as its practice in this part of the world the long assault. It's a 500-year long assault on our territories, our cultures, our languages, and our knowledges. And we often don't think about colonization as having an impact upon our knowledge. But one of the most insidious aspects of colonization, or the long assault, has been its attempt to tell us that the knowledge that we gained from living in our various places for millennia, and then to systematically deride it and move it to the side, and not allow it to be included in state institutions such as education. It has been an absolutely insidious attempt that I think that we don't bring to the forefront enough. Since the surge of research undertaken by the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People in the early 90s in Canada, there has been a concerted effort to bring Indigenous knowledge into our educational institutions, and as well as a very strong desire to use IK to inform what I call the structures and processes of everyday life. And at a tertiary level, what that means is bringing IK into the research and knowledge produced in enterprise, not as an object of anthropological gaze, but as a key informing aspect of research. It also means creating a research climate that accepts Indigenous knowledge. And over the past, I guess, quarter century, we've worked to create what I call Kaswanta space, an ethical space that is based upon respect, friendliness, and collaboration. And Indigenous knowledge can be used to frame research, to determine the objects of research, to determine research methodologies and methods, to interpret and make meaning of the results, and to help to develop solutions to the challenges that we face within our own communities. And this means that granting councils had to become open to including research, including Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous elders in research applications. And over the last 2 decades, through a process of collaboration with Indigenous academics, Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers, public servants, and non-Indigenous academics, the research architecture of our National Granting Council, SSHRC and CHR, has been adjusted to ensure that IK is included in research projects. And this adjustment has included changes to ethics and the ethics review process. It includes the creation of a definition of Indigenous research, the expansion of those who are eligible to hold research grants, new criteria for the review of research, and new research support programs that are designed to encourage and support new Indigenous researchers. And all of this has been done through a collaborative process that required a willingness to take risks, to listen, to experiment, and to learn from mistakes, and above all, to trust. And it also requires a continual willingness to learn and to adjust. And my strong belief is that if we do not bring our knowledge into one of the most powerful institutions that we have created as human beings, and universities are not going to disappear, that if we don't bring our knowledge into these places, that we will continue the work of Indian residential schools here in Canada, and that universities then become just an extension of universities. So what we've been trying to do is trying very hard to ensure that Indigenous knowledge can become part of the institution, and that these institutions work alongside the development of Indigenous institutions as well. And so thank you, and thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. We will now proceed and hear from Mr. Kevin Fitzgibbons. Kevin is from the National Science and Engineering Research Council, also known as NSERC, in Canada. Kevin joined NSERC in 2013 to support their role in federal science, technology, and innovation policy. He has 30 years of experience, including as Director of Innovation and Science at Global Affairs Canada, Executive Director in the Office of the National Science Advisor, and a Policy Advisor with the National Research Council. NSERC is the federal agency responsible for funding natural sciences and engineering research in Canada. Mr. Fitzgibbons, please.
Good day, bonjour and aloha. I have to say that I want to thank you, Laurie, for the introduction, and to Lorna for her great leadership in pulling together with UNESCO and others this very important event for us. So Yes, NSERC, as you have described, Laurie, is about nature, natural sciences, and engineering. And I am speaking to you here from Ottawa, which is on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I'd like to acknowledge their history, their heritage, their importance to our society, and more importantly for today, the value of their knowledge. NSERC is, yes, all about understanding the underpinnings of nature in all its forms. And I think that what we're hearing today and what we hope to be going forward with is a better appreciation of the value of Indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge more generally to the scientific endeavors that we have. One thing that has struck us over the past several months and years of looking at and engaging with Indigenous communities is the inextricable link of the people with nature, with wildlife, with the land and the waters. And we feel that that is such an important rethink that we as an organization need to understand better in the way that we fund science, in the way that we engage with Indigenous communities across Canada, and in the way that we conduct our research. Very much of what Dominique, David, and Carrie have said today is part and parcel of our overall objectives and goals. We are definitely part and parcel of the tri-agency strategy for Indigenous research in Canada, and that we feel that we have a very important role, but we also have a long way to go. I realize that your time is very short, but I want to say first and foremost that our job here is to listen and to engage and to implement. And I think that I would like to do very much today is to hear what others have to say and to see where is it that we can translate those insights that we have and those views into actions that NSERC can apply in its own programming and its evaluation of science. So with that, miigwech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitzgibbons, and I really appreciate especially your parting comments. It's a beautiful segue into the next portion of our agenda today. And that is, we will now hear from some speakers, from people who've been involved in this work for a very long time, and they are now invited to share their work, their findings. It's my pleasure to introduce you today to Dr. Leroy Lil'wat. Dr. Lil'wat is from the Blackfoot First Nation. He is a professor emeritus and the founder of the Native American Studies Department at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada. He also went on to become the founding director of Harvard University's Native American program. Dr. Lil'wat, please.
Okay, si konak sumbatun hukpo, nuxus tikoishk. Tixini tip kitam mukswai, takitsini buis. I'm very honored to be amongst all of you today to speak about something that's very, very important, and that is the whole area of science. I want to congratulate Lorna and her people and all those people that have made this gathering possible. And I want to acknowledge our elders for their opening prayers and the songs that I heard that they are very important part of our science. What I want to say about science is this. Let me very quickly compare it to a house. When we're talking about a house usually has a foundation, okay? And depending on what type of a foundation you have, you can then have and plan your floor plan and the kind of rooms you are going to have, okay? And then once you've got the floor plan, then you can make plans about decorating, furnishing your house, and so on. See? Well, a lot of times when we're talking about science and so on, we usually end up talking at the furnishing level, not so much at the floor plan level, and less so at the foundational level. I want to talk about the foundational level. In science, there are three major areas of science, and that is the science of the big, and that is the cosmos, astrophysics, and so on. There's the science of the local, and that is the reality that we live in an everyday world. It's Newtonian or classical physics and so on. It's about what we touch, what we can hear, and so on, okay? And then there's the science of the small. That's the subatomic world. That's where things like quantum physics comes into the picture. But what is science? Well, science is a search for reality. It's not technology. Technology is application of what is already known. Science is about search for reality. It pushes the envelope into the unknown, okay? So if science is a search for reality, then I, as a Blackfoot, have been a scientist long before it was cool. You know, how is that so? How is that so? Well, it's so because of the foundational basis, that foundation, the paradigms, the metaphysics upon which Blackfoot thinking is based. Let me quickly go through those foundational bases. The Blackfoot paradigm is based on the notion of constant flux. Compare that to Western thought, which is a stagnant world. Greg, who's going to be talking to, is defined the notion of flux very well in his book, Native Science. Blackfoot thought is based on the notion of energy waves, which is really the spirit, okay? Compared to Western notions, which is about matter, particles, and subatomic science. It is all about everything being animate. In Western thought, everything is inanimate, of course, except for you and I, okay? Everything in the Blackfoot thought is about relationships. It's all interrelated. Everything is about relationships, okay? Whereas Western thought is about reductionism. We isolate things, okay? And Blackfoot thought is about renewal. You have to renew the knowledge all the time. Otherwise, you're going to forget it. That's why we sing the same songs, tell the same stories, you know, do the same ceremonies year in and year out, okay? We even tell the same jokes. Say, everybody knows the punchlines, but we still all have a good time with them, see? Whereas in Western thought, it's been there, done, did it. Let's move on to something new, see. in Blackfoot thought, everything is related to place. It's space oriented. Why? Because land is something that's going to change because of the flux, but it doesn't change as fast as other things. So place is, the land is something that we can hang our hat on for at least the time being. That's why land is very sacred, okay? And language is, of course, a repository of knowledge, and it's process-oriented as opposed to, you know, stagnant or noun-oriented. So when we're talking about Blackfoot science, science is about energy, and it's galactically, it's cosmically, you know, based. It looks at the big picture. That's why we have star stories. We have, you know, Scarface in our Blackfoot stories and so on. We have medicine wheels that are all about that. So the goal of Blackfoot science is sustainability, to sustain, you know, our existence, whereas Western science is about measurement, okay? If you can't measure it, it's not scientific. Well, we can say, if it's not about relationships, it's not science from a Blackfoot thought. So when you apply these notions, you come up with a very different science, which is the foundation of Blackfoot thought. Thank you.
Oh, miigwech, Dr. Little Bear.
Yeah.
See lots of hands up and clapping. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be the moderator, but it's I'm just a little starstruck here, and I just can't wait to hear more. Our next speaker is Dr. Gregory Cajete. He is an indigenous Tewa from Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico. Dr. Cajete is a professor of Native American Studies and Language, Literacy, and Sociocultural Studies at the University of New Mexico. He has also lectured at colleges and universities around the world, including Canada, Mexico, New Zealand, England, Italy, Japan, and Russia. It's a pleasure to have you join us here today, Dr. Cajete. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Laurie, for that very kind introduction, and thank you for all of the organizers. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, UNESCO, Canada, and just greetings from the Southwest. As we say, Sengi Thamo in my language, which means good day to all of you. It's really a pleasure to have some opportunities here to present some thoughts and perspectives. And I'm going to basically just segue from Leroy's, eloquent words about Blackfoot physics, and really just to emphasize and underline the fact that, what he is saying is really the indigenous science, the native science. Different tribes will explain it and describe it and reflect on different aspects of it, but it's essentially the same paradigm that we all operate from. And I think that's why, as indigenous peoples, no matter where you are from around the world, you are able to relate to other indigenous people because we have a similar way of understanding ourselves in the world. What I want to really reflect on in my segment, because I think so much has been said. I thank you, David Newhouse, for your great analysis of what is going on and what needs to be going on in the context of higher education. I just retired from the University of New Mexico in June, and really, in a lot of ways, was very happy to retire, but was also struck by the fact that so little has changed in higher education, particularly here in the United States. Many of the things that you've mentioned in going on in Canada in terms of initiatives related to Indigenous thought, Indigenous peoples, Indigenous education as a whole, and now Indigenous science, are things we would like to do in the United States, and certainly we've attempted to do that in our own context. But it's because of the politics, and I'm sure you've watched the television enough from the United States to know what I'm talking about when I say the politics of the day here in the United States that has prevented us from doing a lot of things. But regardless of that, Indigenous scholars here in the United States, Indigenous studies programs, the work of, the Hawaiian movement that Manolani will probably speak about later on. All of these things, give us hope to continue this work. What I want to emphasize in my time is really some of the major issues that I see with regard to Native science and its integration with Western science. In many ways, Leroy alluded to this in his description of Blackfoot metaphysics in the way that Indigenous peoples view and understand themselves in the world, what we call epistemology, how we come to knowledge, how we come to understand ourselves. And that is very, very, very much in contrast with the Western ways of knowing, Western education, Western forms of research, and on, Western forms of economics, Western forms of politics, and one could say, Western everything. It is a very important issue that I think this particular forum is tackling, in the sense that we're beginning to sort of put in place an infrastructure for thinking about this and creating strategies. And of course, this is what I've been doing for 46 years, basically, since 1974, when I first started teaching science here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I saw really, even at that time, just a tremendous challenge, first of all, to re-engage Indigenous students in their own histories, in their own lives, of which science happens to be one of many kinds of histories that we've lost as a result of colonization. So I started, even before the terms decolonized were being used, I started a decolonized science curriculum initiative at the Institute of American Indian Arts, combining science with the cultural histories of the students I was teaching, with Native science, with Native knowledge, and finding ways to creatively weave them together using the arts, using creative writing, using the abilities of our many talented Indigenous students to be able to describe their thoughts and their perspectives and the thoughts and peoples of their peoples in ways that were very, very reflective of them as contemporary people, but also help them to explore their own histories. One of the things that I'm going to read a real quick quote at the time that I was working with this in the work that I was doing, and of course I've lost my time here. So let's see. Okay, so here it is, and this is just a quote from the work of Dr. Raina Green. She was a Cherokee who was head of cultural knowledge and perspectives in the American Association for the Advancement of Science back in the late 70s and early 80s. And she says, I quote, "The lack of an Indian participation in science is as much due to an alienation from the traditions of Western science as from a lack of success or access to science education, bad training in science, or any other reasons conventionally given for minority exclusion from science professionalism. Contrary to the insistence of Western scientists that science is not culture bound, that it produces good, and many Native people feel that science and scientists are thoroughly Western rather than universal, and that science is negative." Now that was a statement that was put out in the late 70s, early 80s. Much of that, unfortunately, is still true in the context of the issues that I have seen, I have worked with my students here in New Mexico with regard to their access to science and science knowledge. It's a kind of intellectual colonization that I think we have to really begin to take a very, very serious stand and very serious look at through research and through other kinds of strategic political strategies that we might entertain, because it's the meme, as we will call it, the meme in the system. Yeah. It's the systemic racism, it's the systemic exclusion, systematic exclusion of indigenous thought, indigenous ways of knowing, and indigenous peoples, from the practice of science, even though we have long traditions of science that we are now beginning to rediscover and re-implement. We haven't been able to make much inroads into the world of Western science. And I think if nothing else, if this forum can really begin to really put forward these strategies and these criticisms, because I think these criticisms are still not only valid, but they have to be brought forward in ways that allow us to work and to build bridges from, towards a better future for our students, for ourselves, and for our communities, because we do need science to help us sustain ourselves into the 21st century in all areas. We do need more Native students in science-related fields, and hopefully, with these kinds of strategies, we'll be able to accomplish them more rapidly within the next decade. So that's all I have to say for right now. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to the thoughts and perspectives of the other speakers.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Cajete. Thank you. I really appreciate your contributions, and most especially your call out for more students. I wholeheartedly support that. I'm really honored now. I'm very happy to introduce you all to Professor Wangula Wangula. He is the founder and the president of the Mapambo, hope I got that right, African Multiversity, located in Busoga, Uganda. Great. Not able to hear you yet, Wangula.
agulumizibwe nga buli nsi zimusinze mu nnimi zaazo. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I have brief remarks, but I speak from a background where we experience bare knuckle colonialism and bare knuckle oppression. And in such circumstances, if you are very conscious, we tend to use strong terms. But I will address myself to the issue of knowledge. Where are the sources? What are the sources of knowledge? In our experience, the sources are from institutions which arise out of man and woman being a social animal. And these are family, neighborhood, community, engagement in the production of requirements of material sustenance. They are education system, but in our case, a lot of it miseducation. Other sources are class struggle within countries, whereby one set of, a small set of people oppresses the rest. And then global struggle, global class struggle, Then lastly, we mentioned the struggle between the countries, which allows a small set of countries oppressing the rest of the countries. And it's out of this which really makes decolonization an issue. And hence, therefore, the talk of what is called mainstream knowledge and conventional knowledge. In our considered view, we are wary of talking about Western knowledge, talking about knowledge in terms of campus directions, Western knowledge, for example, and this term being used side by side with Indian knowledge, African knowledge, Chinese knowledge. I think we need at this moment in time to start being consistent by calling a spade a spade. If there is Indian knowledge, hello? Yeah.
It's connected.
Am I still on? Yeah? Okay. So we need to really be consistent. If we talk about Chinese knowledge, African knowledge, Indian knowledge, then we should not be talking about Western knowledge. We should be consistent and call it European knowledge. But in its extended form, we may call it American knowledge. And the thing, if we talk about knowledge, people's knowledge, we should remember that in reality, the euphemism of Western knowledge, instead of using that euphemism, we should really categorize knowledge and worldviews between dominative or hegemonic knowledge and knowledge which seeks coexistence with other knowledges. Then in reality, in our experience here in Uganda and in Africa in general, we find that it is not possible to decolonize knowledge when the people are colonized. So the point, therefore, is that first and foremost, you need to decolonize countries, nations, and peoples and their languages. So a colonized people cannot have a decolonized knowledge. The point, therefore, in this respect, is not so much for all of us to open ourselves up to all, but rather for all of us to be open, learning from others. We think, we are of the view that the real feast of knowledge will come when there is a sort of Marshall Plan to support the languages, the knowledges which have been othered and handicapped for the last hundreds of years. And at that time, we shall need collaboration between knowledges which are anchored. So we need the existence of a multiplicity of knowledges, because each knowledge brings some nuance to the global basket of knowledge.
Mhm.
Those are our views based on experience in Uganda and in Africa. So we cannot have decolonization, we cannot decolonize knowledge when people colonize. So therefore, decolonizing knowledge is a political question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wangula. Thank you, everyone. I noticed that there's lots of folks typing in the chat. Please keep those comments coming. We have a few more speakers ahead, and really going to try and make time to hear from at least one or two comments from during the open mic time. So just again, please continue using the chat line for now. We'll now, there is a professor who we'll be hearing from in a pre-recorded message, and that is Dr. Yanisa. Dr. Zanisa, I'm sorry, is a professor of anthropology and sociology program in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at the University Kebangsaan, Malaysia. She completed her PhD in 2018 in the field of Indigenous epistemologies from University Malaya. She is Orang Asli from Samalai subgroup in Malaysia.
Hi everyone, my name is Anissa Man and I am Indigenous from Malaysia. I'm also an anthropologist working as a lecturer in University Kebangsaan, Malaysia. So I would like to say thank you to Prof. Hall and Ms. Suryani for giving me a chance to talk in this Indigenous circle for a few minutes, and also thank you to my nephew Muzaffar Yusri for helping me setting with this video. I honestly have no idea of what to do and what to expect when I first received an email or call from Dr. Izawati mentioned about this Indigenous circle. But she convinced me to join with the circle just to gain some knowledge. So that's the reason here I am today to talk to you about what I understand mainly. When I received email from Professor Hall, I read the two attachment and I really liked the idea. And I also pointed out one important point in the 13 key considerations I read for UNESCO. And in this key point, I pointed the important for the time support offered. What I mean here is the support given by the university for the community when they receive the grant. The thing is, when you work as a lecturer with a grant, the time we have is limited. It's really based on the grant and the time. We need to finish it within the time frame. So it's really important because when we couldn't finish it, we have to have a report to say that why we couldn't finish it on time. These things is not really favor the community. For example, the community I work with in Taman Negara, they are the hunter and gatherer society. In consideration number one, the goal is to regain knowledge, autonomy, and self-governance. The problem is not easy to actually have self-government when the community itself could not talk with the outsiders and could not express who they are and even to have face-to-face communication with the outsiders. So it's not that easy. When I went first time back in 1990s to meet with the community in Taman Negara, I was so surprised because as an indigenous, I think they would accept me. I did not. They accept me because of my friend at that time, and my friend is a Malay. The important point over here is to build trust with the community. So if you have that trust, and you will be able to work with the community to understand the community needs. And when I came back after I received recognition, a small recognition from the community, I work with this community. His name is Akwesasne, and he is the leader of the community now. Came back and I work with him. I work as a coordinator for mobility program. So we work together and we have a different setting as compared to when I first met him. It takes time. When I first met them back in 1990s, and then when I came back, this is in 2018. My point over here is it's not about the grant, but it's about developing trust, developing contact with the community you work with. It's not about the study. It's not about what you are, who you are as an anthropology, but it's about who you want to be, who you want to work with, and what the community think of you. With limited grant, with limited time, you need patience. You really need heart to work with the community. The second important point in consideration number 2 that I really want to look into is, as a young scholar, it's quite difficult for me to actually maintain KPI that the university needs of me and to actually work with the community as I want to work. But I'm also blessed with the courage and also the support given by my supervisor, my PhD supervisor, Dr. Julie Edo, and he's now Director General in the Bourassa department, and also Dr. Shanti Tambia, who helped me a lot with my PhD journey and my research journey. As an academician, we cannot run away from KPI, but I find that the university are running away from their main objective because of this KPI. For example, the project I'm working now, translating the indigenous stories from 2 communities, the Jakun from Malaysia in Tasik, and also the Berube from Costa Rica in Bahoque, Talamanca. This community wrote their own story. I translated story by the Jakun community from English to Malay language, and also from English to Malay language for the Berube story. When I work with the Jakun community in Tasik, it's really difficult because I have to convince them to write the story handwriting, and I have to translate it and insert it into Words document, and also I have to work with the children and convincing children the importance of drawing, imagining the stories into picture. I work with this Jakun community since 2003, so I built their trust, and that's the reason I can convince the elder. This also again needs time, and things like this in academic world is quantified by popular publishing, but the book that we will publish is not a high ranking publisher, it's a simple publisher, but the value we have, the knowledge and the hope from the community, from the children that I work with is really important. And to me, this is not easy. You cannot quantify the value you have with the community and the hope that you insert into the children that they actually contribute in the book. This is very important to me. So in this indigenous circle, I don't know how it will move from here, but to me, certain content, certain context in this indigenous open access is really interesting, and it gives hopes to people to actually work something that you really think is very valuable to them. And to me, as long as there is hope, although it's very small, although the journey is really far, but I think I will work on it. And with this, I think that's all from me now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Sanaharya Mintz. Dr. Mintz is an Adivasi activist and Vice Chancellor, Sidho Kanhu Murmu University in Dumka, India. Dr. Mintz is only the second tribeswoman to be elected as a Vice Chancellor.
At the outset, I would like to thank all of you, especially the organizers of the Virtual Indigenous Circle on Open Science and Decolonization of Knowledge. This webinar, to be patient with my non-response to numerous emails. I would like to place on record the patience of Bud Hall. His counterpart, Asia counterpart, had a word with me, and I had given consent to be a speaker and to be participating in the webinar today. I would like to greet you, Johar. That is how we greet from my part of the world, and this is in the heartland of India. Here in India, the indigenous peoples, for the nomenclature or the word that is used is tribe, and I come from an Orang tribe. I'm a second generation literate as far as education or modern education is concerned. I would actually like to say, I mean, it's past midnight, and on the other side of the globe from most of you, but it is such a pleasure to feel the unity of spirit, because I couldn't agree more with all that has been spoken earlier. And me being trained a computer scientist, I've done my master's in mathematics and went on to do my PhD in computer science, and I've been teaching computer science for now 30 years. And only recently, 5 months ago, I was elected or selected to be the head of this university, which is again in the tribal heartland of India. But it is a liberal science and arts university. A little bit about indigenous peoples in India. There are, as far as numbers are concerned, it is popularly said there are over 700 distinct tribes in India. And the population that there is in India, amidst more than 1.3 billion, it is said to be that 105 million population is indigenous population here. And we, besides this dividing line of and non-indigenous, we have multiple other layers in the Indian society. And therefore, the word colonization or decolonization, besides that, I think we have had, at least the indigenous populations in India, have had another layer or another almost an onslaught of mainstreaming of knowledge systems as well as society, even prior to the British colonization. So although being a trained scientist and agreeing with all that was presented earlier from the perspective of open science, I would like to make my intervention in the area of decolonization of knowledge, because now it's been roughly 50 years that I have witnessed efforts that have been made in my part of India towards teaching, learning in the languages of the indigenous peoples. And what I have noticed, although I have not been part of it because I have not been doing the teaching and learning of languages in that are of the tribes or indigenous population here, but being external from that, what I have noticed is not much has happened, because the kind of systematic marginalization and systematic deprivation towards not the people as well as their identity in India has been going on and on for thousands of years. So, but then, as I mentioned, the teaching, learning of the tribal languages or indigenous populations' languages in my part of that is central India started in mid-70s, when the language teaching from in the university or in higher education started. But it has still remained at a very sketchy level, because the study of indigenous people in India has not gone beyond, let's say, the study of anthropology or language in compartmental manner. And there has rarely been any effort and genuine effort to do the culture studies of indigenous peoples in India. And so what I have noticed for of good 40 years, just the language teaching and study of languages, that's been kept as a language level, but never languages and culture studies. And now that I have had this opportunity to head a liberal arts and science university, I am making efforts that in my university, I'm going to have few language and culture studies programs to be started, which would make a new headway here. Because what as I was mentioning earlier, prior to the British colonizers, the mainstreaming of society in India has done so much of marginalization of the people. Now, through these programs, what I see, not being a trained social scientist, but what I see is this is going to be an effort towards claiming the space in this landmass, claiming the space by the indigenous populations, claiming the dignity, and also thereafter trying to claim what our constitution, great constitution, also tries to promise is, equality, justice, fraternity, and liberty. So I see higher education spaces like universities and colleges. If the language and culture studies and various other studies are brought to the university space. Besides, I think the next step could be in making interventions into science, because the kind of lifestyle we have, and it is time and again claimed in India. If there were no indigenous population in India, probably by now the entire place could be something else, because sustainability, the term sustainability can only be understood, at least in India, but from how the indigenous populations have continued to live out. So therefore, I feel in the short time span that I may have again in the university, I'm trying to do my efforts to do this, and I have to have language and culture studies, which would bring a platform, or which would establish a platform to go to the next levels of making formalizing the culture studies, which have so far, I mean, in India, it's not only decolonization, that word that should be there, but also, in order to undo the mainstreaming. And so therefore in India, the term that is used time and again is subaltern. But I would also I would not fully agree with that term, because it is the alternate and sub-alternate, whereas it is an equal alternate, and therefore I do agree with these terms that were being used earlier, that native, and that native be the adjective used for the knowledge systems and etc., because it's so very important to bring out the richness of that indigenous, or what we call in India is tribal knowledge systems, which are opened up for more studies, maybe scientific way of doing the studies, and to bring out what has been kept in the margins and even outside the margins for thousands of years. So as a head of a university, I would like to place before this forum, I feel so blessed and enriched this evening, by afternoon and morning for some of you, to be part of this circle. I would really look forward to seeing opportunities to collaborate with some of you who are in certain universities, and especially even indigenous universities. And it was so heartening to hear a brother from Uganda using the term multiversity rather than university. So thank you, brother, for that. So first thing is I would look for opportunity to collaborate. And second, also, if there are going to be possibilities of, because the kind of society now and the system we have is, if there could be possibility of, fund support, which could do not only unilateral, not only Indian study, but then have other partner on the other side. And the third thing I would like to place for the consideration of the circle is, if in areas such as, Asia and our part of the world, if there can be a focus to mentor leadership of these regional circles, so that we can have a closer bonding in our regions, and also be collaborating with the other others such as all of you on a global level. So with these a few words of my intervention, I would like to once again thank you all for the opportunity that I could be part of this circle today, and I look forward to be a part of this in future and to get more active with this, because I do have my commitment towards bringing the tribal or Adivasi knowledge systems to the formal platforms of higher education in India. Thank you very much. And Johar once again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mintz. We have next speaker coming on. I will introduce her in a moment. Just want to let all of you know we do have 3 more speakers. We want to make a little bit of time for comments during the open mic session, and we will have a summation in the closing. So just I'm saying that because we did book 120 minutes, and we will most definitely be going over time. So perhaps you've already all noticed that as well, and refreshed your coffee or whatever it is, and are enjoying the presentations, the very thoughtful contributions. It's my pleasure, friends, to introduce our next speaker. She is a YU activist from Colombia. Her name is Yasmin Romero Epiayo. Buenos dias, Yasmin. Yasmin's remarks will be interpreted into English by Andres Mejia. From the age of 12, Yasmin began on the path of leadership. She was born in the department of La Guajira, located in the northern part of Colombia. Belonging to the millennial ethnic group of Wayu origin, it proclaims itself as the daughter of the great Mother Earth. She is the daughter of one of the most emblematic women in the conservation and practices of ancestral fabric that is transmitted from generation to generation by the wisest inheritances of grandmother Wale Keru. Andres Mejia is an associate professor at the Faculty of Education at the University de los Andes. Has researched on issues related to education, critical thinking, emotions, and citizenship. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. Si puedes prender la cámara y ya estamos esperando tu intervención.
No escuchamos.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened with Jasmine. I'm going to try to phone her.
Espérenme a ver. Hola. Hola. Sí, ahora sí. ¿Me escuchas, Andrés? Bueno,
te escucho muy bien, Jazmín.
Andrés, no vas a dar para traducir eso porque esa es mi lengua madre. Un saludo de hermandad a todos. Primero que todo, agradecerle a la Comisión Canadiense de la UNESCO, a Gouptil, Cátedra de UNESCO y a los demás organizadores. Me siento muy complacida a pesar de los dolores que hoy tengo en mi corazón porque estamos perdiendo muchos sabedores espirituales en nuestro pueblo producto de la pandemia. Acabamos de perder a dos grandes seres espirituales en el seno de mi familia, que para nosotros no es nada fácil, pero aquí estamos en memoria de ellas. Seguiremos pues en esta tarea de forjar todo ese trabajo que hoy voy a dar como una pequeña introducción de lo que soy y de lo que nosotros hacemos.
Well, firstly, Jazmín introduced herself in her native language, which I don't understand anyway. And then she said, but I think it was basically what Laurie already said in the introduction. And then she said that that she would like to say hi to everybody and to thank all the organizers of this very important meeting. She's also very pleased to be here despite the heartache that she has because she has recently, because her community, the Wayuu community, has recently lost many wise people due to the pandemics, due to the COVID-19. In fact, in her own family, two wise people just died very recently. So she's really sad because of that. She's very pleased to be here, and she wants to say that she and the rest of her community will continue to work to try to keep the ideas and the work of those who have passed away. Sí, Jazmín.
Bueno, ¿quién soy? Bueno, yo creo que desde los 12 años yo vengo liderando toda una causa en mi pueblo. Yo soy activista y feminista desde hace muchísimos años. He trabajado arduamente por la defensa de la madre naturaleza, por la defensa de sus recursos naturales y por la defensa de los derechos de las mujeres, derechos individuales, en particular los derechos de las niñas, de las adolescentes y mujeres. De hecho, ahorita estamos en unas campañas muy fuertes aquí en Colombia, que apunta a todo eso. Pero más que todo, voy a hablar un poco sobre la importancia de lo que es la ancestralidad, la sabiduría, esa lengua que es una lengua ágrafa, la que nosotros poseemos, una lengua que compone toda la espiritualidad nuestra, y que está permeada en nuestra sangre, que está permeada en nuestros usos y costumbres, en nuestros tejidos, esto que tenemos aquí al fondo. Todo eso se transmite de generación en generación. Hemos trabajado arduamente para que eso continúe de la mejor forma, continúe en esa generación que hoy también sufre varios impactos impactos del neoliberalismo, impactos del extractivismo en territorios ancestrales.
Okay, Jazmín had just said that since she was 12 years old, she has been leading a just cause in his hometown. She is an activist and feminist for many years. She has also been defending Mother Nature and she has struggled for the defense of rights of Wayuu women, especially girls and women adolescents. She's actually right now in the middle of a campaign in that respect. But she wants to talk today about the importance of ancestral knowledges and the importance of keeping their ancestral tongue. It's a tongue which doesn't have a written form, but it is constitutive of Wayuu spirituality. It can be seen in their fabrics, and what she has in the background is an example of the fabrics that the Wayuu people make. It's also in their blood and in their culture in general. It's transmitted through generations. And much of the work that she and others in her community have done is to try to keep it going from generation to generation in the face of all the impact that neoliberalism and extractivism have had on their culture.
Bueno, explicaré brevemente qué es lo que nosotros hacemos para fortalecer y para luchar hacia la pervivencia de nuestros pueblos. Desde el año pasado, en medio de todas esas resistencias, porque yo trabajo más que todo es en resistencia, en defensa del territorio, en defensa de los derechos de las mujeres. Entonces, en medio de eso, nos hemos articulado como pueblos de hablar algo tan fundamental como es la espiritualidad en nuestras culturas milenarias. Y es que resulta que desde el año pasado hemos venido pactando palabras con los 4 pueblos de la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, que son los arhuacos, los coquis, los wiwas y los cancos, para aunar esfuerzos desde la espiritualidad, y que lo hemos denominado el Gran Pacto Espiritual por la Defensa del Territorio. Esto con el propósito de salvaguardar salvaguardar y limpiar un poco y de desmarcarnos un poco del sistema capital, del sistema neoliberal, de decir, apartémonos y hagamos nuestra tarea nosotros para buscar la fuerza de nuestros ancestros, buscar retomar nuevamente la espiritualidad con nuestros ancestros, pero más que todo es una tarea ardua. La hicimos el año pasado en la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, pero aún faltan otros procesos que lo tenemos que hacer aquí en un sitio sagrado nuestro, que es la Serranía de la Macuira, porque lo que vamos a hacer es como una especie de mortuorios, de llamar a los espíritus, de nuestros espíritus que hoy viajan, están allí ocultos, para conversar con ellos y que nos orienten cuál es el camino correcto que debemos hacer para salvaguardar nuestro territorio, que está devastado, está en manos de transnacionales, para luego irse desde la espiritualidad, buscar un camino amplio que pueda salvar nuestro territorio.
Okay. She wants to talk about what it is that they do in order to strengthen and to have a more strength and struggle for the survival of their peoples. What she does mostly is basically about the resistance in defense of their territories and the rights of women. But she has also, and more generally, the Wayuu community has also started to create some alliances with some other peoples, especially the Arhuacos, Cogis, Wiwas, and Cancuamos, in order to get together to become stronger and to talk about spirituality of these ancestral peoples. So that they have created what they call a great spiritual pact for the defense of the territory. And what they want to do is to safeguard and to clean their territories in order to try to put aside and to be able to recover territories from the capitalist system and liberalism in order to look for strength from their ancestors and to retake spirituality as a main guiding force. It's a strong fight, it's a very strong struggle, but last year in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, which is actually the mountain range where these other four peoples, Arhuacos, Coyos, Wiwas, and Cancuamos live, and they got together there in order to create this great pact. But now they have to do it again in the mountain range called Maquira, which is a sacred site for the Wayuu people in La Guajira. They are going to go there and they're going to invoke the spirits who are here in order to talk to them and to get some guidance from them so they can know how to better safeguard their territories, which in the present is mostly in the hands of multinational corporations.
Dentro de todos esos propósitos que nosotros queremos adelantar, que yo creo que Andrés, ojalá tú puedas pasarle esto, esa propuesta, ese proyecto se lo podemos pasar, porque la invitación que hacemos también es a la comunidad científica, a la UNESCO, que se case con este proyecto también, porque es un proyecto donde todos podemos juntarnos para salvaguardar la riqueza y la espiritualidad, la memoria de los pueblos milenarios que están en riesgo. Porque lo que nosotros vamos a hacer allí es juntar a los grandes sabedores, los que manejan la espiritualidad, tanto de los 4 pueblos de la sierra y los que las OUTs, que son las sabedoras mujeres que nosotros tenemos, para que ellas sean las que evalúen el estado y la situación en que se encuentra nuestro territorio, para luego mirar cuál ruta seguir para nuestro territorio y para el futuro. Porque cuando nosotros hablamos de la espiritualidad, hablamos del equilibrio, de salvaguardar el planeta, porque sabemos que el planeta en estos momentos sufre unas situaciones muy caóticas. Estamos en medio de la basura, estamos en medio de crisis bastante agitador, cambios climáticos que nos generan serios problemas para la existencia del ser humano. Y yo creo que esta tarea apunta a eso. La comunidad científica debe estar al lado de la comunidad científica ancestral indígena, que es lo que yo hago. Yo no trabajo desde una academia científica, pero sí trabajo desde la academia ancestral de los pueblos milenarios, porque yo estoy todo el tiempo escuchando, comentando, investigando, hago investigaciones propias, saberes propios de cómo se interpreta, cómo se puede dar un manejo. Somos nosotras las creadoras de este espacio del encuentro o del pacto espiritual por la defensa de Mahingan, que es Madre Tierra, por la defensa del agua, que bastante lo necesitamos en este territorio, porque no tenemos agua en este territorio. Para que ustedes se lleven una lectura, en este departamento es donde mueren niños producto de la sed y del hambre, cuando es un territorio supuestamente bastante rico, pero quienes son dueños de esos recursos que han venido explotando sin ningún tipo de consulta son los inversionistas extranjeros.
She would like to perhaps pass on this project to pass it around so that everybody can have access to it and can see it. And she would like to call the scientific community and UNESCO to join in this project, because in it we all can together help to save the richness of these ancestral peoples who are presently at risk. In this project, they want to put these people, the wise men, especially in the wise men, the Wayuu community, should be together in order to together make diagnostics of the situation of their territories and to decide on what is the path to follow. And it is surely a path of spirituality. And when we talk about spirituality, we talk about equilibrium. We talk about saving the planets. Sorry, Laurie, 5 minutes? Saving the planet. Because the planet right now is presently in a crisis, a climatic crisis. It's in the middle of a rubbish or garbage crisis. For human being. So the scientific community should be beside this ancestral scientific community where she works, because she considers herself a researcher, a scientific researcher, because she does research with their own ancestral knowledges. This ancestral knowledge, which goes in the defense of Uminkate. I'm not sure I pronounced it right, but it's Mother Earth, but also because in Guajira is the region of Colombia in which presently many children are dying of starvation and thirst. It's supposed to be a very rich territory. However, it's being exploited by these multinational corporations. Jazmín, me dijeron hace un momentico que nos quedan solamente 5 minutos, entonces creo que sería como cerrar.
Sí, muchísimas gracias. Quería como mencionar un poco que yo una vez estuve en la UNESCO en París, en la COP21, estuve también en una conferencia muy importante porque me gané una beca que tenía que ver con cambio climático y otros entendimientos del cambio climático, se llamó nuestro proyecto, y la resiliencia. Y estuve allá y creo que es fundamental decirles que expandirle esa invitación de que aunamos esfuerzos para poder salvaguardar la pervivencia de los pueblos, que está bastante en riesgo. Yo en estos momentos estoy devastada porque acabo de perder a 2 grandes grandes sabios, sabedoras de mi familia, de mi territorio, y entonces eso para nosotros es muy doloroso, y yo creo que hoy la reflexión es que salvemos a los pueblos indígenas porque estamos en riesgo.
Okay, now just some closing words. She would like to thank everybody, but she also wanted to mention that she was once in Paris in a UNESCO meeting, and she had a kind of scholarship to study something about climate change and resilience and community resilience. And she would like to again extend the invitation to get together and join all our efforts to save these communities which are really in danger presently. So yeah, that is it. Okay.
Bueno,
muchas gracias, Jazmín.
Muchas gracias a ti, Andrés. Gracias a todos.
Thank you all.
Muchas gracias, Yasmin. Muchas gracias, Andreas. Thank you very much for your presentation and the invitation to collaborate. I'm really pleased now, friends, to welcome Dr. Ed Connors to provide his remarks. Dr. Connors is a psychologist from Kahnawake in Ontario, or Canada. I think it's over by Quebec, actually. Dr. Connors has worked with First Nations communities across Canada since 1982 in both urban and rural centers. His work over this time has included clinical director for an infant mental health center in the city of Regina and director for the Sacred Circle, a suicide prevention program developed to serve First Nations communities in northwestern Ontario. Dr. Connors, please.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate the honor that you've bestowed upon me to be able to share with you. I'm going to bring up, or attempt to bring up, something to share with you on your screen, which hopefully I can do, I think. I hope, can you see that? Can you see that?
No, we're not able to.
Not able? Okay. I thought I went to this, maybe, I know why. Sorry. Well, let me go back for 1 second and bring this up for you. Again, I want to give my thanks to the committee, and especially to Lorna for her efforts to bring this group together. I'm just looking to see if it's here. Join. Oh, it's not come up for some reason. I'll see if I can bring it up through the conversation. It is indeed a pleasure to be here to speak with you and to share my thoughts, especially considering that I've been given the opportunity to speak at after listening to so many of my illustrious colleagues and esteemed colleagues from around the world. And I want to give thanks to all of you for being so patient to actually listen to the thoughts that are being expressed here. And given the difficulties that we have, just to talk with one another in our different languages from so many places around Mother Earth, and that we are able to do so during this pandemic and connect with one another and share these most important thoughts that I'm just full of now, and I'm having to put them aside for the moment in order to be able to share my thoughts with you. As I share my thoughts, I want to further introduce myself, because indeed I do come from Kahnawake, Mohawk territory. That is where my mother was born and raised, and I also come from the town of Mount Royal, which is part of Montreal, which is across the river. For those of you who don't know our geography in Quebec, it's a river called the St. Lawrence that divides our communities. But there is a bridge that also connects those two sides of the river. And as you now know, I've been born into two sides, or from two sides of the river, from in fact two worldviews. And I have been able to actually, over my lifetime, be able to see the world through two eyes. One eye seeing the worldview of my Indigenous ancestors from Kahnawake, and the other eye seeing the world through my Indigenous ancestries of my father's side, which in fact originate from Ireland. So in doing so, I've had the good fortune to be able to learn both and be able to respect both, and to understand the significance and importance of both of those, not only in sustaining my life, but then in understanding how to promote and support life on Earth. So as I say that, I'm also, as I've listened to you, to all of you, I've realized as well that by and large, I represent another sector of the place from which knowledge has come. Many of you have committed yourselves in your careers to learning knowledge from within what some people refer to as institutions of higher knowledge or higher education. Even that concept alone creates the division between the knowledges that exist in the world today. And that gulf is one that I think we have to transcend if we are truly going to achieve what you're envisioning through this talk that we're sharing today. I chose when I left from the higher knowledge, from the tower of higher knowledge, or the tower often of power. I chose to go out to learn knowledge from out in our territories across Canada, or what was once where Canada, the word Canada comes from, by the way, for those of you who don't know. It comes from my Haudenosaunee ancestry, and it was actually Ganada, and that's, meaning the village. So I traveled across the country, and I sat in the lodges of my ancestors and our elders, our healers, our medicine people, in order to understand better what we needed to know specifically about how to live life better, how to just live life, how to survive in the face of the difficulties that were posed to our communities of Indigenous across Turtle Island as a result of colonization. So I've realized as I've listened to you that by and large my talk today it can be titled The Grassroots Application of Indigenous Knowledge and Science. And so I'm going to speak to you therefore about what I've seen and what I've come to understand about knowledge. I understand and I find it quite amazing. And I also find it a great mystery that so much of the world's population has come to believe in a myth that our valued knowledge as humans has only evolved since the emergence of what has been called civilization. And that so much of our world's population seems to believe that all of the accumulated knowledge over the thousands of years of our human existence, that only the knowledge that has formed throughout this period of human existence called civilization is of value. Contrary to these beliefs, I and many others of you and of our world's population recognize accumulated knowledge that we have formed throughout human time is not only significant and of value, but it is necessary for the continued existence of humans on Akwesasne, which is an Ojibwe term or Anishinaabe term meaning Mother Earth. I will give you an example now of my indigenous colleagues and I, that we have been acting to resurface our indigenous knowledge in the fields of healthcare, justice, and suicide prevention. Regarding suicide prevention, which I've been applying and grappling with for over 40 years within my service to our indigenous communities, I share this short story. 5 years ago, my colleague John Rice and I decided to rethink our approach to suicide prevention by thinking about suicide prevention through an Anishinaabe lens or worldview. For many years prior to that, in my career, I was facing and dealing with the issues of suicide and attempting to help our people to live life and to find hope in living as opposed to losing hope and choosing death over life. And that is a truism, that it's a truth that exists around the world. I've come to learn it as I've studied the experiences of our indigenous populations worldwide, that we have the highest rates of suicide of all peoples. So in facing that and trying to understand that, we initially had been relying upon what we have now spoken of here in this gathering as European knowledge about suicide and suicide prevention. But what John and I decided to do, because John is an Anishinaabe speaker, he's fluent in the language, he's fluent in the culture, he's a knowledge keeper. He was raised in the Anishinaabe culture. And when he and I, after many years working around with our communities, attempting to address suicide and create a change, a positive change in our communities, in the health of our communities, we came to realize that we needed to come back to the knowledge that exists within our languages. And so in so doing, we sat and began to speak about what is suicide and how do we understand that within the language, from an Anishinaabe language. And as we spoke together about that, then we began to rethink our approach to suicide prevention by thinking about suicide prevention through an Anishinaabe lens or worldview. And as we began to do so, we're beginning to have, as John spoke in the Anishinaabe language about suicide prevention and then translating those thoughts into and that knowledge back into English, we began to redefine suicide prevention in terms of life promotion. Or as it's said in Ojibwe, in the language of the Ojibwe or the Anishinaabe, we began to define and redefine Minobamadzuin, or living the good life. Through Indigenous knowledge and teachings, we encouraged others to explore with us how we can support each other to live long and good lives, and how to avoid premature unnatural death. This process of rethinking with our Indigenous knowledge about life promotion has created a dialogue within our Indigenous communities and with healthcare systems that is shifting the paradigm from suicide prevention to a focus on preventing death, and a focus on preventing death to life promotion or supporting long and good lives. We have, over the past 5 years, created a website which has engaged our Indigenous communities to share their knowledge about life promotion by telling their stories about life promotion from within their Indigenous communities. That site I was going to show you an image actually of Mother Earth. That's what I was trying to bring up. And that image on it has this website. Mother Earth, again in the Anishinaabe, we refer to as Akikwe. The site is wisepractices.ca. practices.ca, place where you can learn more about what we are doing in terms of this Indigenous knowledge development. This process of translating our Indigenous ancestral knowledge is informing much of what is assisting our Indigenous communities to restore health and wellness, and therefore to survive. This can be seen in healthcare as we fight for equity in healthcare by introducing such concepts as cultural safety, and more specifically, Indigenous cultural safety. And in justice, where we have been redeveloping Indigenous restorative healing justice within our communities. I invite you to explore this knowledge, as we are more than eager to share it with the world for the benefit of all of life on Akikwe and for our planet, our mother, Akikwe. Yawa, Miigwech, thank you. I'll just refer you, by the way, back to another site where you can learn more about the concept of Minobamadzuin, and that is www.7generations.org. That's 7, just the number 7, generations, GENERATIONS.org. Miigwech, Nyawa, all our relations.
Miigwech, Dr. Connors. I did list in the chat the website that Dr. Connors mentioned, so please, take a look at it, and thank you so much for your presentation. I'm really pleased now to ask you all to join me in welcoming Dr. Manulani Aluli Mayer. She is the 5th daughter of Emma Aluli and Harry Meyer. She comes from Mokapu and Hilo Paliku, beloved places in Hawaii. Dr. Meyer is dedicated to the role Indigenous epistemology will play in worldwide awakening, and sees this discussion as yet another link in this ongoing transformation. Aloha, Doctor.
Aloha mai. Thank you, Laurie. Aloha mai kakoa paue ku'umauhoa. So good to have you, even all the way from India and Colombia, and we've got our Uganda and New Mexico. Aloha to you, Greg. Aloha to you, Uncle Leroy. Aloha, Lorna. Aloha, David. Aloha to all of you. What a blessing to have so many cousins in the house. Really, it is. My job as the last speaker is to not sum it up, but I have to say, the people that have come before me, especially our yes. I love your synonym for spirituality is equilibrium, equilibrium. That is absolutely brilliant, Yasmin. And our Professor Mintz from India. I love that equal alternate is actually a synonym for native knowledge. Okay, so we are actually, and of course, Uncle Leroy, you talking about, you know, it's really easier, as we know, is to take down an old house instead of just kind of you know what I mean? But because I've been in that business of re-understanding the foundations of a house, if you really want to do it well, those old bricks really look good. The old wood, if you really work it hard, we are actually rebuilding the structure of a house that is assumed to be one formation, one dimension. But I really want to also thank Keiki Kawaiʻaeʻa, one of our women warriors in Hawaii that has been dedicated to our own language, our Hawaiian language. Thank you, Keiki, for being on. So to extend what Uncle Leroy is saying and what Greg has said in his whole life in Native science, and what Auntie Lorna has said her whole life in the clarity that you posit, Lorna, thank you for this opportunity, is that spirituality is at the base. Spirituality is at the base. Spirituality is at the base. So let's give you some synonyms to spirituality. The intricate order, Indra's net. Isn't that beautiful? Professor Mintz, Indra's net is a synonym for the hidden matrix of the universe. It's the energy that Leroy is speaking of, because research is ultimately renewal. Synonyms for in sciences: quality, continuity, and space. The mundane empirical sciences are about quantity, control, and time. Do you see the difference? So what we're heading into is the rise of the feminine, the rise of the actualization of a kind of wisdom that's based on love of land. When you have Aloha Aina at the center of our sciences, we're not wondering if the bottom line is money for our investors. Do you understand that science is linked to money? And that is what Yasmin made very clear. And the long assault that David Newhouse has spoke about is it's going to be over because we are going to be over. And so the continuity of our sciences is now key. And what I've learned by from my own places, our places of Hawaii, Maokealoha no Hawaii, Maloko ne Mawahone, from the inside to the outside, we love our lands here. And so our land is not simply called land, Aina, ku Aina Aloha. We called it that which nourishes, that has always loved us. So then we had to turn to Aloha Aina in the 70s. I love that in the 70s we created our Renaissance, because research is renewal. We were renewing ourselves through relationality, dynamic coherence, interdependence, mutual causality, and what the post-quantum sciences is calling complementarity. Isn't that beautiful? The ultimate sciences of the Western world is calling the post-quantum world complementarity. We have that in concepts. Aloha aku, aloha mai, kokua aku, kokua mai, a'o aku, a'o mai. This is a form of simultaneity that isn't about reciprocity. It's about consciousness. And when that consciousness is about serving people, that's the spiritual energy that is absolutely builds a mutual emergent future for the world. And we are at that crisis because you have now asked us to the table. Mutual emergence isn't about one culture over the other. Specific leads to universality. That is the key. And that's the localization of knowledge. That is the honoring of our native voices, our native ideas. But so there's three aspects to the natural world. Absolutely. These are absolutely key. There's a physical aspect, and I learned that because of our word ike. Ike means to see. There's a mental inside aspect, subjective aspect, and I learned that from our word ike. Ike is the word for knowing, for knowledge. And then there's a transspatial, quantum, spiritual, for lack of a you don't lose the idea that spirituality is religion. It's not. On a good day, religion is spiritual, but religion is the bureaucracy of spirituality. So what Uncle Leroy and Greg has been saying and Lorna has been saying their whole life, and even you, David, I appreciate your clarity, is that the idea is about flux. Energy is flux, life is flux, and relationality is not a noun. It's a verb based on principles. And when our principles become the center of our new science, KNEW, not new, there's nothing new. When we have relationality and the quality of what that means, we will actually understand when our subjectivity changes things. We're not going to hide behind the false veil of objectivity. The maturity of the world is on fire. And so I want to spend these last minute to tell you how special these people have been. Leroy, when I saw you for the first time, you know how we were giving a talk, I think there might have been the second or third time we were giving a talk at UC Berkeley. And I said something stupid like, yeah, land was a metaphor for our mother. And you scolded, you said, oh, Manu, land is not a metaphor for our mother. Land is our mother. And that changed everything for me. Because, when you stop viewing in the external world as the external world, the Buddha says reality is not the external world, it's how we perceive it. So my work from epistemology became hermeneutics. And that means those who interpret better. And the interpretation now has run into a dead end. Indigenous epistemology is about continuity. That is a synonym for indigeneity, continuity. And in that center of continuity, of course, is love. Love is the primal source of our collective emergence, says Lee Irwin. I call it aloha. We call it aloha here in Hawaii. And it's not a commodity. It is an energetic field of purpose, shared meaning, passion, and commitment to the love of land and the service of people. Oya wale no. Love of land, service of people. And this is what Greg has also confirmed in all of his writings, especially Native Science. Get that book, everybody. Hopefully you've got another publisher, Greg. And see, I just want to end up by saying we are saying the same thing differently. Holism isn't about polemics. Holism is about interconnectivity, is about renewal. I love when Uncle Leroy said science is about energy, and our goal is sustainability, and that's also our process. So mau ke aloha no Hawaii, mau ke aloha no moana nui a kea. Love always for this place that has nourished me, and love always for the places that nourish and have shaped all of you. So together, let's do this, gang. And I would love to collaborate with India, beloved India. Mahalo nui for being here at 1 o'clock in the morning. Mahalo nui. Mahalo. Aloha ahuiho, everyone. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Auntie Lorna. Mahalo.
Thank you so much. Your passion and your energy and the emotions. I don't think I'm alone when I'm expressing my own emotions right now. Your words lift us up so much in so many ways. Miigwech. On behalf of all the guests, everyone here today, thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you, Dr. Little Bear. Thank you, Dr. Cajete. Thank you, Dr. Mintz. Thank you, Dr. Meyer. I'm going to forget people. Professor Wangula, Jasmine, Dr. Connors, thank you so much. The presentation from Dr. Zanissa Man, so much richness shared here. Lorna, you have assembled a wonderful gathering, a wonderful day. Recognizing we went over time a little bit, but still providing space for one or two guests who have joined us if there are, you know, contributions that you would like to provide to this conversation, you know, please signal in the chat. I would be pleased to invite you to, you know, offer a comment maybe in the space of a minute. I'm going to just turn it open, and while I'm waiting for someone to send that signal, just want to read to you some of the comments that have already been shared by people who were presenting. Kia ora, raubu atu, Uncle Leroy, Little Bear. A good reminder that strong foundations are the point of Native community. Me aku me. In response to Wangula's presentation, I have been calling this Euro-birthed knowledges and institutions and systems. Just trying to find a few more. Often Indigenous people of Northeast India remain invisible to the dominant majority groups of India. Just 1 second more. Tracy Herbert from British Columbia, she said, in British Columbia, we are investing in community-based language revitalization, creating new speakers with immersion and documenting languages where the data is curated and managed by community. Those are just a couple of comments. I know that there are many, many more in collected through the chat throughout the presentation. So I haven't seen anyone come forward to ask to offer comments. Again, I just invite you, if there are links, if there are papers that any of the guests want to share, please post the links right into the chat so we can collect them. There will be an outcome document being developed out of this conversation today to inform the recommendation we spoke of so much earlier. So please do share the information. I am going to take us now over to the next portion of our agenda, and that is the summation. It's been an honor to share this day with all of you, with so many dedicated scholars, organizations, and engaged guests, to help summarize what we have heard today and offer some additional insights. I will invite Dr. Jose Barrero and Kevin Lowe to do that. We'll start with Dr. Barrero. He is a member of the Taino Nation of the Antilles. Dr. Barrero is visible as an advocate of indigeneity in a lifelong mission to create understanding and application of an Indigenous philosophy of localized community, valuing the human-land-nature relationship and the great range of ecosystemic knowledge of Native cultures. With consistent contributions in his field of visions, Dr. Barrero is a writer, journalist, oral historian, as a field organizer of major public events, as a curator, as an activist and scholar, and as an editor-in-chief, appears through 40 years of social and human rights activism on behalf of Native peoples. Please, Dr. Barrero. Don't know if we lost him.
I think we've lost him. I don't see his name. Maybe
Okay.
We'll start with Kevin.
Okay, please then, Kevin Lowe, who is our joining Dr. Barrero in providing a summation, is a Guppy man from Queensland. He is now a science, I hope I got that right, Indigenous Research Fellow at the University, I guess that's New South Wales. He had extensive educational experience, including teaching and inspector of Aboriginal education. He established successful programs to support language policy, curriculum, and school implementation. His current work includes establishing a holistic pedagogic framework that engages Aboriginal knowledges and investigating how curriculum structurally marginalizes unique epistemologies. Mr. Lowe? You're on mute. Okay. We still can't hear you.
Up at the top, Kevin, there's a little icon, a little microphone. We can't hear you, Kevin. We can't hear you.
Have we lost Kevin? Oh, there he is.
Nathan, can we unmute him centrally?
It already says he's unmuted, actually.
I wonder if we could suggest he call in by, is it possible to connect by telephone, Nathan?
Yes, it is. It also might be worth trying to just rejoin the meeting. Laurie, I don't know if it's too late for this, but there is a question in the chat.
Okay. Okay, so I'll pose the question and maybe I'll ask one of the speakers if they can respond. So the question, the statement reads, our Indigenous knowledge survived and thrived for millennia. Now, in a period of 2 or 3 generations, our ancestral wisdom and our science is on the brink of extinction in many parts of the world. How can we build capacity among Indigenous scholars and communities? How can we help develop more scholars who bring Indigenous knowledge out to the world? How can we make collaboration among global Indigenous scholars like this a regular event? If one of the speakers would...
Laurie, I have a few thoughts on that. You know, I think, as I said earlier, we really have to create a strategy, actively, as especially with regard to how we disseminate, aspects of Indigenous knowledge, not only among Indigenous peoples, once again, but among ourselves. And of course, education is both responsible for a lot of the loss of our language and culture, but it can also be on the other side of the coin, the way that we reclaim it. And so this is why the education piece, particularly of Indigenous young people with regard to science and native knowledge, has to be a priority within the context of our higher education institutions. while they may provide a platform, they have been the single most difficult challenge, I think, for many Indigenous people. The whole institution of Western education. As a Native educator, I've worked in this area for many years. And I think really that it just behooves us, to begin to really create a strong foundation, as Leroy has put it, that really begins to bring forward the Indigenous principles and thoughts into the way that Western science, is conducted, and also the way in which Western education, higher education particularly, is done. I think, Mano's, points are right on. The changes that have to be made are transformative, particularly for the Western system. From the standpoint of a systemic bias that, permeates throughout Western academe, that's consistently faced by Indigenous scholars and also Indigenous students in all areas as they participate in Western education. That's a serious issue that really prevents a lot of the dissemination of the knowledge that we're talking about in ways that are important for us as Indigenous peoples. We've been doing this work certainly for a long time among ourselves, within the context of our own organizations, our grassroots projects. But now I think it's time for Western academe to really take note that Indigenous thought has to be a part of this world conversation with regard to transforming ourselves into a better paradigm that is for life's sake, as we have said. It's about this life sake orientation, which is a common thought among Indigenous peoples as well. So that's what I would say, in response to that particular question. Again, we just move forward, with what we're doing, but do more of it, and more extensively, especially with the youth.
Can I come in briefly on this?
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with what was said by Gregory just now, but then in situations such as India, where it is marginalization and deprivation is an imperative and historical past, I feel it is important for us to, I was looking forward to listen to Kevin Laurie, because it was said the content development they have been involved with. To me, it feels that the early years of formal education based on the Western framework, I think there, if the content is cultural and the children at the primary school level, if they are introduced to their cultural heritage and knowledge systems, I think they grow with the dignity of their culture. And they don't consider, or we would not consider our culture secondary to the formal education. And I would like to pitch this thing, or I would like to pitch an experiment with this, as to what the generation who grows with the initial education, which is so cultural, including the pedagogies, be cultural, not only content, but pedagogy be cultural. And so they grow with the initial cognitive framework. And then, yeah, so I would like to see that component also come in.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Mintz. Thank you, Dr. Cajete. Dr. Little Bear, please go ahead.
Yeah, there is a book that was written long time ago. The book is probably 100 years old now. Another guy named Daniel Carrie, and the title of this book was The Hidden Ireland. And what he meant by the Hidden Ireland was that he said, we live next to the colonists in this case, which were the British, and they lived among us and next to us, but they treated us like we were non-existent. You know, they treated us as though we weren't there. But looking back, it was a blessing in disguise because they didn't bother us, and which gave us the opportunity to continue, you know, with our literature, with our language, with our cultural practices, and so on. And that's what he meant by the hidden Ireland. And so the science, the European science and so on, is based on the notion of measurement. If it's not measurable, it's not science, see? Whereas indigenous science, as we've heard from the presenters, is about relationships. And it's a relationship with the total environment, the land, all the animals, the sky, and so forth. And that European science is also heavily based on the notion of time, which is a human creation. There is no such thing. All there is movement, but there's no such thing as time, see? And so that science is starting to run its course. And consequently, our approach should be that community-based, that land-based approach. And the shortcut to that is speaking our languages, because the language is the repository of the knowledge. That's the shortcut to our knowledge, to our sciences.
Thank you, Dr. Littlebear, for that contribution and summation for us today. Our Mr. Lowe and Dr. Barrero, we must have had some connection issues, and I think Mr. Lowe was not able to get his mic working, so we will request their notes separately. You know, really, this has been an incredible session. This has been an incredible circle that we've all shared together. All for your contributions, your good energy, your good thoughts, for showing up, for your hearts and your minds today. Thank you. It is my honor to call upon Dr. Manulani to help us close our event today with a song.
Uhola ia kamakaloala, puai ke aloha ala, kukai ia kahaloala, pavehi mai na lehua. Mai ka ho'oku ia ka halawaila, mahalo e na akua, mahalo e na kupuna laea, mahalo me ke aloha la. Mahalo me ke aloha la. Mahalo.
Miigwech, thank you.